Welcome to the second of our three discussions of the Symphony Number 3, the Altered Landscape Symphony by Jimmy Lopez Bellido, that the Reno Phil has commissioned and will be premiering in May. I'm Chris Morrison. I'll be the moderator for today's discussion. And on the panel with me, we have, of course, the music director and conductor of the Reno Phil, Laura Jackson, Dr. Brandi Kindig, medical director at Northern Nevada Sierra Medical Center, Dennyse Sewell, the executive director of the Pioneer Center for the Performing Arts, and meditation instructor Stephen Jacobs. This Symphony Number 3 by Jimmy Lopez Bellido deals with a number of really interesting and important issues. And the Reno Phil thought it would be a good idea to have these discussions to take on these issues prior to our actually hearing the symphony. Now, in our first panel discussion, which took place about a month ago, we discussed the first movement of the symphony, which is called the Great Acceleration. The Great Acceleration being the ever-increasing pace of technological innovation, especially since around the year 1950, but also the increasing impact of humankind on the environment around us here on planet Earth, which is in fact the central theme of the Altered Landscape collection at the Nevada Museum of Art, which was the initial inspiration for Jimmy's symphony. Now, in the middle of writing this symphony, the coronavirus era intervened. And so the second movement of the symphony is called Stillness, and it talks about the impact of the coronavirus and the coronavirus era, both in terms of the Great Acceleration and in terms of our individual lives. So that's what we'll be discussing today. Before we get into all of that, why don't we turn things over to Laura for just a moment, and she can sort of get us up to speed on this symphony project in general and how it came to be.
This project, it came out of years ago, a talk with David Walker and myself. And, we're always looking for great collaborations in this town. Whenever you collaborate with another institution, you make what you do bigger and better and more wonderful, and you can reach more people with it. So every now and then I will sit down with David and say, hey, what are you all cooking up in the next couple of years, and what might we do together? And our conversation went to the Altered Landscape photographic collection, which is the signature collection of the NMA. And I thought it would be really neat to do something on that collection because it was a defining moment for the NMA when they put that together in 2011. It really launched the museum on the international stage, and now subsets of that exhibit travel the globe to various museums. So this photographic collection is photographs that are exploring the relationship of human beings to the earth, our imprint, our footprint on the natural landscape. And what I then did was angst over what composer to choose. I chose an absolutely remarkable composer, Jimmy Lopez Bellido, who I had been following for a while, and I had conducted one of his works a couple of years prior. And he wrote an incredible symphony, and it has turned into a collaboration not only with the NMA, but also with Nature Conservancy, which is very exciting because out of this work will come some genuine impact. Proceeds from consortium orchestras that join us, that perform it after we do the world premiere. Proceeds from that effort will go entirely to the Nature Conservancy. So it's a neat collaboration.
None of us have had a chance to hear the symphony yet. We will be hearing a little bit of it today, but it's just a few weeks away now, isn't it?
It's incredible. Yes. Oh, my goodness. It's really, that sends a chill down my spine. This is something that I've been anticipating with great excitement for so long. And it's such a remarkable work. It's turned into this 4-movement trajectory where we have the Great Acceleration is the first movement, and then Stillness, which we're talking about tonight, that's the second. We have Reckoning, and that leads into the final movement, which is a message of hope. And it's all about alignment, a hypothetical sort of envisioning of where we can be if we figure out how to live sustainably on the earth.
It's important to note that the symphony does have an optimistic view at the conclusion. But that's not going to be where we're going to be spending much of our time today. We're going to be spending our time with the second movement of the symphony. And we'll be getting into some details of how the symphony is put together. But what we're going to do first is cast our minds back to, let's say, the opening months of 2020, which is the time in which Jimmy is starting to write the movement that we're going to be talking about today. The early days of our awareness of COVID-19. And Brandi, I think you would be a logical person to start with here. The first documented case happened in China right at the end of 2019, if I remember correctly. How did this enter your consciousness? How did you start to see it? When did you start to hear about it? And what did those opening months look like?
Hi. So first I got sick in January of 2020, and it's the sickest I've ever been. Our whole family got sick. And I was 3 days unable to get off the couch and 3 weeks sick, and thought, I had
Terrible.
not yet heard what was happening. And
So you didn't really even know what the problem was.
No, looking back, I realized what had happened. But in the medical community, it took, we started hearing murmurs late January through February. And our medical minds are more, it's a virus, it's a coronavirus, it's a cold virus. What's the big deal? I thought I had a flu or something. I didn't really put those two things together. And then really the lockdown seemed to happen before the rush into the hospital did. So really what happened is our hospital went mass exodus. So we didn't really have, it was very slow, and we didn't have a lot of patients. And we started having to wear a lot of extra material in masks and bonnets and booties and scrubs and gowns. And that just exponentially increased along with the number of cases we started seeing through probably April, May, and then the summer was really when it was in very much full swing.
And information is making its way, at least out to the general world, very slowly during that period of time. What was it like in your experience? Were you kind of learning on the job as you were doing things?
Yeah, it was day and night. It was, I was actually on spring break with my kids in Mammoth, and they closed the mountain down. And we thought, and then they closed much of the town down, and it started feeling much scarier. And I was more and more loath to go back to work because I knew what would be waiting when I got there. And I actually had the next 2 weeks off. So when I went back, it was just contingency plan after contingency plan after contingency plan, and everything was new every day. It's this treatment. No, don't do that. We're going to do this instead. Nobody knew anything. What's a little different in the hospital was everybody was willing to admit that this didn't work. We're going to try this. We have no idea. We're going to give it our best shot, which I think was key because we were all in it together and all learning together daily. We had daily meetings, daily huddles. We would, then the surges and ebbs and flows were coming. So we would build out the COVID unit, and then we would take down the COVID unit or move them to a different floor. And then 10 more patients would come in, and we'd have to open it back up. So it was just utter chaos for probably 3 to 4 months.
High stress level among everybody, I'm sure. And I can only imagine what it must have been like dealing with the patients who have even less of an idea of what's going on than you did.
Yeah. And then there was no vaccine.
Right.
There was no vaccine on the horizon. So we're just dead in the water, it felt like. Lots and lots and lots of loss. And it was, it was so virulent and scary that then we couldn't let family members in. And then that was even more stress because we're talking on the phone with families and they're begging to see their loved ones. And then finally we come up with, okay, well, if they get to where they're going to die and we have to take them off life support, you can put on your garb and sign a waiver and come in for when we take them off life support. And it really, the first it's been different phases. The first 6 months was chaos and uncertainty and just helplessness. We lost so many people because it happened so fast. And then all of a sudden, everything was full. Where are we going to put these people? We're running out of ventilators. We have 3 more in the hospital. We don't have anyone else in the community who has any to give us. So all of that kind of stress was more disaster stress. It felt like when we used to watch MASH, just a MASH unit everywhere. And everyone at different hospitals had the same stories. My sister's a ICU nurse at St. Mary's, and we would just decompress to each other. Then, that's the stress that we had at the time we're referring to. Then the stress changed.
Evolved over time.
Evolved into different kinds of stress over time.
We're going to be talking a little bit later on about mindfulness and self-care, but in the midst of what you were experiencing, where were you able to find that? Where were you able to find a break? Or were you able to?
I'll say we, because we weren't. Really, work became the break, because work, you're in your alien suit, you're relatively safe, and you're just head down doing your job. And then it's time to go home, and I would go to the locker room, put on a different pair of scrubs, scrub everything with, Clorox wipes, get in my car, wipe down my car, sit in my car, get home. The dogs, the kids, the husband would come to the door and I'd say, no, stay. Do not come out here. Be in the garage. I would strip down everything, put that in a paper bag. I mean, this was when we just did not know much. So everything had virus on it, at the time. So paper bag, I would have called them ahead. Please bring out my robe. I would put my robe on. I still couldn't touch them. Nope. I would run inside to our downstairs bathroom where I had moved in, shower, wash my hair. Then when I came out of the bathroom, I'd lock the door because it still had my paper bag of clothes in there, say hi to the family, then do my laundry. I mean, every day for 4 months, 5 months. Then it lessened. And I was like, okay, I don't think it's in my hair. I don't think it's in my clothes that I already changed, So it would, that ritual would lessen, but it was still just, the mindset was there all the time. But that was the hardest, because that normally would be my solace. Pull in, get the hugs, pet the dog, kiss my husband, and start our evening, cut off from work and start home life. And that couldn't happen, and couldn't see my parents, couldn't do any of that normal stuff.
Under more normal circumstances, are you able to find a dividing line between what you experience at work and then home life and relaxation and getting recharged?
Under normal, yes. There you learn to compartmentalize, where doctors are very good at that. Where he would come into play very well for us, because we just turn that part off. Normally can kind of leave that at the door. So it'll be there in the morning, and really just, I have twin 10-year-olds. So they were 8 at the time, and they're very involved with me. So that just I just turn into mom at that time. So really get that extra life away from work and somewhat leave it behind, but not at that time, not really, because I would have had to, talk to 3 families who lost their loved one, or see someone really decompensate over the day and things like that. So,
well, thank you for being willing to share all of that with us. That immediately and kind of viscerally sets the scene of what we were all experiencing to some degree or another back in 2020. But this is making its way out into the broader community, and organizations are having to start to think about what they're going to do. And Dennyse, this is a good place to bring you in, the Pioneer Center. You're bringing in performers from all over the world. And it's changing from week to week to week. When did you start becoming aware of what was going on, and what were your initial steps?
It was actually the Reno Phil that first asked, hey, what are you hearing about this virus? I said, what virus? I hadn't heard anything about it. And they said, we've been watching this. We've been wondering what's going on. This was in February, and the team at the Phil had been trying to monitor and to try to assess what's going to happen if it makes it to us. And I thought that was such an interesting and forward-looking thing. And I thought, how wild. We're just going to keep doing our jobs, and they'll let us know if they learn anything interesting. Because it was so far removed from anything I had ever imagined. I couldn't even mentally go to the possibility of what they might be hinting at. The fact that we're having this panel right now is so interesting, because it's exactly 2 years ago that we closed the organization. Yeah. I was the last to believe that that was what we needed to do. It took an order from the mayor of the city of Reno that we had to close down for me to acknowledge that this was really happening. I just couldn't fathom that something like this was possible. We work so far ahead. We spend so much of our time planning these events, booking these artists, scheduling the calendar, selling thousands upon thousands of tickets, to imagine that there would ever be a world that we would have to undo that work. I couldn't fathom. So when even I had to face that this is what was happening, it was really, again, a question of working backwards and saying, okay, so starting with the events, we have to cancel just next month, because it's probably only 1 month. Okay, the month after that, because it's probably, the day that we closed the building and went home, the staff and I, we laugh about it now, but we stood in the upper lobby together, and it was snowing that day. And we just looked at each other and said, like, okay, well, I guess take what you need to work from home for a week. Because I just can't, I literally, I didn't even know what it meant to work from home, because we run a theater. The purpose is the building, right? We don't work from home, we work from the building. And so I brought home paper clips and Post-it notes, because I thought, I don't know what work from home is. I literally don't know. We didn't have remote access to our computers. Of course, Zoom wasn't a thing. We didn't know how to do that work remotely. And I just told the team, like, take whatever you think you need for about a week, and and we'll just be back here soon. And the joke was on me, right? Month after month, show after show, one cancellation after another, thousands upon that. Tens of thousands of patrons that we had to contact and issue refunds to them person by person from our houses in quarantine, sanitizing our groceries, unsure what was happening. No idea when it would end. And it was like a movie where you could just flip the page of the calendar and the next one was blank. And again, the next one was blank, over and over. To a real, for me personally, which I love that Stephen is here right now, such a crisis of identity. Because my work is my passion. Listening to Brandi talk about how do you separate from work, I don't. And so to not be able to do the work that feeds my soul, and for those of us who run performing arts centers, again, the physical space, the bringing together of the audience is the work that we do. that turning of the month after month of blank after blank was again a real crisis of identity for, I think, a lot of us in the world, absolutely, and all of us in the arts that I know.
Stephen, let me bring you into this as well. What was your personal experience of that time? You have a business. You are definitely an active patron of the arts. I see you at concerts and have seen you at concerts all the time for years. What were those months looking like from your perspective?
Well, from a business perspective, not much was going on because I learned to teach meditation over Zoom, but always transcendental meditation, which is one of the primary systems of meditation that I teach, is done in person. So from a business perspective, not much was going on for much of the last couple of years. It's picked up quite a bit now. But I just wanted to comment on the interesting circumstance that I'm sitting between Brandi, who is completely overworked in a very devastating situation with so many ill people and many of them dying and dealing with all of that. And Dennyse was having an identity crisis because nothing's happening at her place. And interesting, meditation is about balancing out all the different aspects of life. So what's active and what's silent? And how do we find balance with that, whether we're in a pandemic or not? Because we have inner life and we have outer life. And in the West, I'd say we are preoccupied with the outer dimension primarily. And that creates imbalance in a lot of areas. Health is one of the areas that creates imbalance, but identity is another one. Relationship is another one. Because when we're stressed, either because we have too much to do or not enough to do, we don't interact with our families and our friends and our communities in the same way either.
Yeah.
So it's sort of it's interesting that I'm sitting between the two of you talking about the ability to balance life out.
And that's the context in, well, were you going to say something, Brandi?
We were trying to figure out where to sit.
Oh, that's right. We're having a debate about who should sit where. It worked out very nicely, it seems. So this is the period in which Jimmy Lopez Bellido is thinking that he is going to write a symphony based on, and he has started to write a symphony based on the Altered Landscape collection at the Nevada Museum of Art. And suddenly circumstances change. Laura, are you still with us?
Yes, indeed, right here.
Good. Because let's get into talking a little bit about what happened, how this work evolved, given the circumstances in which it was composed. Should we listen to Jimmy first? Would you like to comment after that?
Sure.
Yeah. Jimmy
Well,
was
actually, Chris, let me say a couple things first.
Yeah, please do.
You know, when I first called him and pitched the project to him, I didn't tell him what kind of form we wanted. I didn't even tell him symphony. I just said, I want you to look at this photographic collection and react to it musically. And we want about 30 minutes of music, do whatever. And, it was, he's an incredibly experienced and thoughtful composer who has systems, and he really will sort of put together a structure, and then he just goes full steam ahead on it. So, I left it open-ended to him, but he had already come back to us with a certain sort of skeleton, and then the pandemic changed everything. And actually now go ahead and play Jimmy's comment.
Yeah, Jimmy was not able to be with us for this particular conversation, but we recorded an interview with him a few months ago for the Reno Phil's podcast, Inside the Music. And here's just a little segment from that interview in which he talks about this specific second movement that we are talking about today.
Prior to the pandemic, because all the conversations we had with Laura about the project itself took place prior to the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, a lot of the plan had to change. So what you see now, the result, it was not a symphony to begin with, and it was not necessarily in 4 movements. But I remember having this very important conversation with Laura. And she said, Jimmy, I think for us to move forward, we need to find a way for the piece to be informed with what is taking place in the world right now. And my first reaction was not necessarily very receptive, because I had already structured my piece and I had this idea, but at the same time I realized, well, there's no way that perhaps even myself, I can bring myself to writing this piece if I don't allow for the current events to really, go through me and into the work itself. And that's when the actual structure of the piece really took shape. So in the universe that we have created within the piece, the first movement ends at the moment that the pandemic starts. And that's why the second movement is called Stillness, when everything is brought to a halt. And this is how I feel that the first movement becomes even more of a powerful depiction of what happens before, precisely because of the contrast of what comes after. I was troubled at the beginning, thinking that, well, is it going to feel opportunistic? Because, a lot of people were starting to write things that were relevant to the pandemic, and am I going to be one of those? But on the other hand, I felt, no, it ended up being one of the most honest pieces I've written, honestly, because I was able to really, it was difficult to write as well, because every day I'll have to come, and after listening to the news, full of despair, isolation, and death, all of that are not easy feelings to deal with when writing. And so I took on the task of really trying to reflect that through music.
To fill in a little bit of the context, this is, as Jimmy has mentioned and Laura has mentioned, a 4-movement piece. And we're talking really about the second movement. But there is a first movement titled The Great Acceleration, which deals with this phase basically from the 1950s on, called the Great Acceleration, the acceleration of technological innovation, but also the period of ever increasing impacts of humankind on the world around us. And Laura, in terms of the music of the first movement, we're talking about a pretty, the little bit I've heard of it, it sounds like a pretty wild piece. It actually does accelerate, and it's rhythmically powerful and builds up to kind of a frenzy, as opposed to the second movement, which is completely different from that.
Yes, indeed. I mean, the first movement is actually the longest of the symphony. And, he lays out themes, but it has almost this demonic kind of machine-like quality to it, an energy that builds and builds and builds through the whole thing. So it has a great deal of intensity and drive. It's very thrilling and gripping to experience. And then the second movement, hearing Jimmy talk about that conversation really brings me back to that moment. And, talking about, so hearing Dennyse and Brandi talk about their experiences in that time, we got on the phone, Jimmy and I, and we were both so scared. We were scared for everything. Of course, all of us were, but being in the arts, and here I was the conductor of an orchestra, and an orchestra requires that you get a whole group of people together on stage in close quarters in order to even happen. There's just there's no way to work around that. So all of his commissions, all of his projects were getting canceled. And this is how he makes his living. So he was terrified that we were going to cancel too, especially something big like this. And this isn't for a small little, 8 players. This is a large scale orchestra. It has a lot of people on stage. So it would have been, sort of understandable if we had pulled the plug on that. And nobody was knowing whether we were going to have any funding, whether we were going to have a future. I mean, it was incredibly terrifying. But I remember what happened. I was at the grocery store before I called him. And as I was getting back in the car, after you have all your wipes and your mask and the whole bit, and I just sat in my car for a second and I realized that the entire world was an altered landscape, everything. This was no longer just about climate change. We were living it, and there was no way in which our future was going to be unaffected by what we were in. And so that was when I went home and I called Jimmy and I said, there's no other way. There's just no other way, because when we come out of this, we're not going to just go back to how things were and enjoying concerts the same way. And, we need, one of the things that art is for is to help us process life, to help us process experiences that we have, because it puts it in this sort of lens, and we can sort of look at it from a little bit of a distance, because it's happening on stage, and that way we can sort of experience it in a very personal way, but also in an objective way, enough for us to tolerate sometimes very powerful life experiences that are wrapped into music. So Jimmy, as he said, was resistant at first. He was like, I don't know, Laura, I'm already going, with, and there was it was almost a desperation in his determination to continue, to continue writing and creating in such a crazy environment, and such an abyss of unknown. But when he went and thought about it a bit and got back to me, he realized this was actually, it would make it easier and more real. And I'm so glad, because as he said, the whole thing took shape at that moment. And then Chris, getting back to, how this movement is different. Is this a good time to actually just say a few sentences about this movement itself?
Yeah.
Okay. So it begins with labored breathing written into music. It is so haunting and so cool. There is and he didn't tell me that, but when I was studying it, it was just the image that I had, the way the whole orchestra was sort of swelling with this inhale and exhale. And it has the harmonies are dense in a way that just gave me the sense of wheezing. It's only for a few bars, but it's a remarkable effect. And then what tends to happen is there are threads, beginnings of things that are very hopeful, and then they dissipate. And then, and then something starts again, and it just kind of falls to the ground. And then there's a rather menacing theme with great intensity that comes into the music. And to me, it depicts the fear of what was outside what was inside our homes, what was, this unseen enemy that we didn't know very much about. And all of this gives way to a moment of silence. And then one of the most beautiful melodies that has ever been written. It's so incredibly lovely. And when Jimmy says, this piece is honest, it is unlike anything he has ever written, because I know his music really well. There is a way in which in this piece and in this moment in the piece, he was writing straight from the heart. And it has such a melancholy, it brings tears to my eyes like every time I even study it. And it has the English horn, which is already sort of a haunting, sort of deep, rich, melancholy color. And then and a halo around it. It sort of echoes and shimmers in this way. And it, all of us have had difficult experiences in life. And for me, sometimes there is great beauty that comes out of those times, and things that I feel changed by forever. I remember when I couldn't play for a while with an injury when I was a violinist. And, there were just wonderful ways that I connected to music that came out of that personal experience. So I really feel like that the melody at this moment in the piece is exactly that for Jimmy. And that's the one that we have recorded. So you'll hear that excerpt.
Shall we hear it right now? As a matter of fact,
Go for it.
having set the stage so well, here's a little excerpt from this second movement. This might be a good opportunity to mention that the reason that these excerpts, one of the reasons that these excerpts were recorded is that they're going to be accompanying an exhibition of some of the works from the Altered Landscape collection at the Nevada Museum of Art, which is coming up pretty soon too, right, Laura?
It is indeed. It opens in April, and I am suddenly horrified that I'm not certain of the opening date. I think it's the 16th of April.
I think that's right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So basically what this is going to be is a room in the NMA that will exhibit a subset of photos from the Altered Landscape collection that Jimmy chose after, poring over the photographs. And there are some that relate to each movement. And what they're going to do, this has been so incredibly exciting to work with Ann Wolf and Chris Martin at the NMA. Each wall is going to represent a movement of the symphony. And what you'll hear as you go in, you will hear that excerpt that you just heard, but you will hear then excerpts of the other three movements as well. And there will be an indication when you're hearing, movement two, so that you will know this excerpt that you're hearing right now is relating to this wall, that kind of thing. And it's not when we do the piece, a lot of people ask, are you going to have like pictures behind the performance? And what we're going to do, we're going to have pictures that are displayed, like 3 or 4 pictures before each movement. So there will be a pause, you see the photographs, and then we play the music. And that's partly because Jimmy was inspired by the collection. He wasn't inspired specifically by, this or that photograph in such a way that this theme represents that photo. So he doesn't want you to have to be struggling to find that direct a connection. So we will have the photographs. They definitely give a sense of as a group, they give a sense of each movement, and they're incredibly powerful. And they're, in the museum, we're still figuring out how to arrange them on each wall. We're even swapping out a couple because the sizes don't work. It's just totally fascinating. This is all virtual. I'm looking at it all virtually. They have these, incredible programs that show you all these artworks, hanging. And there will be written text. And then there's going to be a glass case in the middle that has Jimmy's sketches. And if you were at the last lecture, you saw some of that. He's done incredibly detailed diagrams, some of the research that has gone into his work, as well as just freehand drawings that sort of sketch out the trajectory of a given movement. So those will be part of it as well.
That's coming up in mid-April. So once again, just a few weeks away. Keep your eyes open for that. This actually provides a very nice transition into the next segment of our talk. We have covered the difficulties, the horrors of the opening months of the pandemic, but gradually over time, we have found ways to adapt, new ways to deal with things. It's still dark a lot of the time, but organizations, say like the Reno Phil, have found alternative ways to keep connected with the audience. Now, of course, presenting concerts again, but Laura, there are lots of other things going on, even while concerts themselves weren't happening.
Yes. Oh my goodness. I think the staff and I never worked harder than we did during the time when concerts were not happening, because we were trying to figure out how to reinvent ourselves. And the first thing, and we're so grateful to Dennyse for being open to this, the first thing was establishing cameras in the hall, 8 robotic cameras that enabled us to do virtual programs. And we could only have a few musicians on stage at a time, but we were able to stay in contact with our patrons by continuing to perform and put something into their living rooms. And before that, we were sending individuals or small ensemble groups. It was our Spread Joy campaign. They had T-shirts And they would go do little pop-up concerts and play for 10 minutes here or there in front of a storefront or, you know, in the square or in a park. And not long enough to generate a crowd, but just enough to bring a smile, to make people feel a little less alone. And even before that, in the initial weeks when all of us were completely locked in our homes and just, you know, scared to go anywhere, we had musicians make videos from their homes in their living rooms, and it was just the coolest thing. So, you know, we were always thinking, how can we connect? How can we provide a little bit of relief and a little bit of community through the work that we do, even though we can't gather and make music. And then as soon as we could, we did.
And are.
And are.
How did this process look for you, Dennyse, at the Pioneer Center? There are obviously many months of just being shut down altogether. What was the reemergence like?
Yeah, I mean, our venue takes up an entire city block, and we, in essence, abandoned it. You know, we go back to check, make sure no windows were broken or anything along those lines, but no heat, no lights, no power, no garbage pickup, no one in the building for months on end. And it really was through the visionary partnership of the Phil that there was this opportunity, this little glimmer of, but what if we filmed stuff? Could we do that? Like, oh, please, yes, come back in the building. Please give us a reason to be in that beautiful building. And that willingness to sort of be at the forefront, that the Philharmonic staff said, let's try this and let's see how it goes. That's what enabled our team to have a reason to come back and facilitate that with you guys. And it opened the door for other groups too. AVA Ballet Theater decided, well, heck, we can come back and do a small something. So they did the Nutcracker for, I kid you not, 50 people. At the height of social distancing, that was the maximum we could fit in the auditorium was 50, and we're usually 1,500. But to properly distance people into pods, it was just 50. But to do a Nutcracker for 50 people was one of the most emotional things we've ever done. So somehow for that small group, it was so meaningful and so worth it to try. The arts really tried to figure out, how do we do virtual in any way that still carries some sort of impact, right? Because it's that fleeting moment together with strangers alone in the dark, but not alone, where that temporary thing happens on stage that transforms you. How do we recreate that on Zoom or YouTube?
Or at least try.
Or try to give you a little nugget of something. Arts organizations, to Laura's point, spent so much time rethinking. What are we if we can't physically be with you? What is the value, and how do we still add to this community? How do we still give people a place of sanctuary and of hope through this process? And arts organizations in our community came together like never before and really shared thoughts and ideas and best practices, and did panel discussions just like this, but from our living rooms. The local theater companies really banded together to figure out, how do we create like Zoom plays where we each do our little bit on Zoom, and then the other person's camera clicks in and they do their little bit. And
Who among us had heard of Zoom before about 2020?
Did it exist? I don't know.
I don't know.
Maybe.
But we're certainly reliant on it now.
Yeah, it's like the buzzword now. So it was really just through the bravery of arts organizations who said, we'd like to try. We realized that our front plaza, as a big wide open space, could also be activated in a way that enabled people to be safer because they were outside. So there were some really gorgeous dance performances that happened on our front plaza. There were some artist vendor markets because, again, visual artists had no way to sell their work during the pandemic. They too were isolated and without revenue sources, just like the composer. And so just figuring out how our physical space could transform to accommodate whatever was possible, and just how we could support each other really as arts organizations. And even if the endless Zoom meetings, they just helped us feel a little less alone. We were sharing best practices of, oh, hey, this organization in Germany tried such and such, so maybe someday we'll try that too. So it was just a lot of connecting through our isolation that I think made the difference for us.
What do things look like today for you? basically more or less back to normal?
Yeah, I think actually crazier than pre-pandemic, because every organization that had to go dormant, they created in the background, right? They got hungry to come back in a big way, and our physical space can only host so many things. Before you'd have 2 shows a day, and we can't quite do that. But every organization was busy rethinking, who do they want to be when they come out of this? So the requests to host dance companies we've never worked with before, touring artists who've never been to Reno, just artists who are so hungry for the chance to connect, that I think the next couple years are just going to be bonkers. There's just going to be an explosion of beautiful opportunities for everyone to connect with, because we are so ready. And I mean, my goodness, right? Cross your fingers that we're really, really coming out of this. But there's so much great work to share that I think we'll be busier than ever before, certainly at the Pioneer Center.
Yeah. Brandi, let me bring you back into this. We documented how difficult those initial months were, and I'm sure there are still many difficult times ahead, and you experienced many more in the interim, but a vaccine did eventually emerge, and there have been, I guess, peaks and valleys of activity. What have things looked like since then for you?
Different. Clinically, medically better, much better. But that's for the vaccinated people.
Right.
So it has morphed now. 2021 was full of, let's see, that was the vaccine. Yeah, just about January, February, March of 2021. The lion's share started getting vaccinated. So the numbers really changed. I can't say they went down, but we started seeing, we would start asking on admission. So then the person picking up the patient would know vaccination status, because that did affect treatment somewhat too, and what we would give and what we could expect. We finally were able to expect certain things. So there is a period of joy. Oh my gosh, it's working. But these people haven't gotten vaccinated, and there's no change. It's the same as at the beginning. And then it became, you didn't get vaccinated people in the hospital for COVID, maybe 1%. And it was usually an incidental, they came in for something else and they happened to test positive, but we weren't really treating them for COVID, or it was very, very mild and they were home the next day or 2 days, as opposed to weeks on high flow oxygen, unable to breathe, and maybe going to the ICU and then getting worse and all of that. So then it shifted. It didn't feel as hopeless, but then a new kind of hopelessness came, where I'm trying to be very diplomatic here. The people's thoughts and feelings and viewpoints really came out like I've never seen before, especially in the medical community, or especially in the medical setting, where, what your doctor says is not the end all be all, but it's usually valued and respected, and it usually works to get you better and out of the hospital, and there's gratefulness and there's thanks at the end. And
there's some degree of agreement that you are the expert and you have an idea of the course forward.
Yeah. And that really changed as it narrowed into, okay, this isn't all people with COVID now. This is really primarily 99% unvaccinated by choice people with COVID, who really are very outspoken about not getting vaccinated and why they're not, and we don't know anything, and science doesn't mean anything, and coming into the hospital, gasping for air, begging for our treatments for COVID, demanding them, but not having been willing to get one shot. And so that's how it shifted for us. And the music really speaks to me because it was very, there was a lot of despair, and we were also sad and feeling hopeless. And then it was so hopeful. And then it really just, like is it a chasm? Chasm.
Mhm.
Just everything split. And you had people who were still very thankful for your care. And then another subset of people where it was amazing. They're threatening lawsuits because we wouldn't give them ivermectin and things that had not been approved to use and were actually harmful to people, and having family members call and lawyers call, and just it changed. 2021 was really where you went from, it really challenged our compassion.
I can imagine.
We do this because we're full of compassion and want to give it out, and we gave out so much, and then to have it just squashed over and over and over was just very, very foreign.
Yeah, nothing that you had
Like
ever
nothing
experienced
before.
before.
And I would say I got through to a small amount. I would try to just pull my compassion through and say, why aren't you vaccinated? Why did you choose not to get vaccinated? Without judgment. And I would get a lot of judgment and a lot of defense, and they use baby fetuses to make that, and that has trackers in it, and just things that where did you hear this? Please go here, read this. I will tell you, I'm standing in this unit. There are 40 of you, 39 of you are not vaccinated. That's the most empirical data I can give you. I'm standing here, look at me, taking care of you, all of these other people. You just, if nothing else, use that. You're in it. So that part's been hard because you can only keep that level of compassion for so long, and then you go over to the dark side of things where it just becomes anger.
As more normal as things seem to be, I think it's still true. We're losing between 1,000 and 2,000 people a day in the United States to COVID-19. Is that, did I read that statistic correctly?
I really don't know. I can say that we're back in the hopeful stage of January. There was another spike, and we had a lot. Our hospital just was bursting again. But February into March, it's steadily been decreasing. And when I left, I worked 7 on, 7 off. And when I left on Wednesday, we had 0 patients in the hospital with COVID. So that was very hopeful. And they took the wall down to make the COVID unit. They took it down, and we all, maybe we shouldn't take it. It's like superstitious. And when the mask mandate went away, we all thought, oh no, here we go again. But really, so far, fingers crossed, we're at least deadly hospital cases are lessening.
So there is some hopefulness.
There is some hope. Yes.
Good.
And, we really just, after the initial shock of, why are you so mad at me? I didn't make this choice for you. I'm here to take care of you. After that initial shock of there was a lot, repeated just battering. We just kind of turned off and said, I will treat you. I hope you get better. If you don't, you'll be going to the ICU. Good luck. Very more robotic, which I don't like at all, but
not ideal.
Self-preservation for sure.
Yeah.
And now we're starting to have, non-COVID cases where it's starting to be able to, the compassion's coming out again, and the thankfulness is coming back. And so it's getting better.
Good. Which leads us actually to another segment of this talk. We've been talking in somewhat dire terms at some points during today. And we've been talking about the extent to which so many of us have had to isolate and turn inward and find ways to cope with what is happening around us. And Stephen, it so happens that you teach meditation, which is a method, among other things, to turn inward. Why would we want to turn inward even more in a situation where we're being forced by the world to turn inward?
Well, that's a beautiful question. If you think of the mind being like an ocean, so on the surface of the ocean are waves. That's conscious mind. Drop down a few hundred feet. It's much quieter. The ocean isn't moving so much. That's subconscious mind. Drop down a mile. It's dark. It's completely silent. The floor of the ocean. That's the source of the mind. So the mind has this range to it: conscious mind, subconscious mind, source of the mind. When the mind begins to quiet down with meditation, it experiences these deeper, quieter values of consciousness. And we come out of that experience 15, 20 minutes later, typically, we're calm, we're energized, we're happy, we're compassionate, we're sensitive. Just thinking about some of the comments that the three other panelists have mentioned in the last few minutes. Laura mentioned the beautiful moment in this second movement that Jimmy wrote where there's a silence. And then she used an expression somewhat like it's some of the most beautiful music ever that follows that. That music, good art of that caliber, comes from deep, quiet, settled consciousness. She spoke of it. It came from his heart. We could talk about it that way. It's expanded consciousness that we have access to. And Dennyse mentioned the magic of having the public back to view art, to view music, to participate again, when the artist communicates so deeply with the observer. What they have created touches them, and there's a magical moment. That is deep, settled consciousness. And you've all had it anyway, because you've had it in nature, maybe seeing the Grand Canyon for the first time, or waking up in the sequoias or something. You're touched in a deep, deep way. It's beyond words. We call it awe. That is within the realm of human consciousness. So what meditation does is it provides us with a systematic way to access that day after day after day. And that builds a resilience to the outer world in the sense that we don't feel so overwhelmed by circumstances again. Because Brandi's experience of working so hard for so many months in helping people and having to go home and take her clothes off and shower and do all of this just to be with her family safely again. And then within a few months, have people feeling ungrateful and angry with her. That level of anger is not coming from a deep, settled level of consciousness. It's coming from stressed out people that can't do any better. So meditation is a way to cultivate the human nervous system so that we can ride the waves of life, because we've had some drastic times here the last couple of years. Huge changes, huge upheaval, but we may be experiencing another upheaval now, right? Look at the world situation. This is the nature of the relative world. Change, ongoing change. Everything is transitory. Nothing stays the same. How do we deal with that? Particularly when we have this accelerated development that the first movement is talking about. Things are getting faster and faster and faster all the time. That's the nature of life too, to expand like that. So we need some way to quiet down, individually and collectively. You can think of the individuals that are taking it out on Brandi, even though she's doing her best. And you can think of a collective pool of consciousness that creates international disasters. The individual influences the collective, and the collective influences the individual. And we're all in this together. We are all in one boat called humanity. And we need drastically to create more calmness, more integrated functioning on all levels.
Can anyone do this, and can it be done under even the dark sort of life circumstances that we've been experiencing over the last couple of years?
Anyone can do it. We can teach transcendental meditation to kids as young as 10. They like to do it. I taught a 13-year-old in Florida a couple of weeks ago, her and her stepdad. She was having trouble and was in counseling and going the wrong direction. And her mom had taken a meditation class from me years ago, and they lived in Reno. And she said, my daughter and her stepfather would like to learn. I taught them over Zoom. And 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, she says, I love it. The tension, the stress, kids have it too. And that gets cut out because you experience something that's larger than the physical world with the ups and the downs, and somebody likes me, now they don't, or somebody just defriended me on Facebook and I don't have the right kind of genes, or, all that. We need something bigger. It's within, it's our inner self. That's what we're connecting with in meditation. It's there anyway. All the wisdom traditions all over the world have spoken about that. What lies within? It's what we're all looking for. Every human is looking for this. Thoreau said, most people spend their whole life fishing without ever realizing it's not fish they're looking for. They're going out in nature. They're throwing a line in the water and reeling it in for that quieting down. But we can do this anywhere. I traveled for many, many years on airplanes. I meditated hundreds of hours. Closed my eyes. I would arrive refreshed, happy, contented. Other people, they didn't look like that. It's just such a beautiful thing. And the world is desperate for this. A lot of what people in the world are doing is trying to rearrange the surface values of life. Oh, if I could just get a bigger house. Let's get a new car. Let's have a family reunion. Let's take a trip to Hawaii. Let's, whatever it is. Fine. All these things are good. They're beautiful. We should do all that. But sometimes those things don't turn out the way we want. That family reunion, Uncle Henry showed up, and boy, is he ever a problem. That family vacation, we can't wait to get to that mountain cabin because we've always been able to relax there. We didn't relax this time. We were worried about something. We had a conflict in our family. Someone we knew has an illness. We don't, I don't know if I'm in the right profession. Maybe I need to, the mind's like this. Here we are up at the mountain cabin, beautiful lake, nothing to do, no internet, no phone coverage, nothing. All we have to do is enjoy ourselves. Can't do it. Mind is buzzing. You know what I'm talking about. I know you do. Everyone does. You all know. There's value in having the mind quiet in a regular manner. Then we take that with us into the world. Whether we're dealing with ungrateful patients in a hospital or we're living somewhere where everyone loves us, we can hang on to our own center regardless of the outer world. We learn to ride those waves, and we're not dependent on the world. We still like to go to the mountain cabin, but if we have a terrible day at work, it doesn't set us back very much.
This might be a slightly over personal question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Are there any meditation self-help mindfulness techniques that any of you have either rediscovered over the last couple of years that have been beneficial to you, or things that you have discovered anew that have been helpful in maintaining a level of mental balance?
Are you asking me?
I'm asking anybody who'd like to answer.
Well,
I'll
I'm
answer if
not
you
a
want.
good one to ask because I've been meditating for 45 years.
Yes.
So I found something long ago, it worked and I stayed with it, learned to teach it. So you guys should comment if there's an answer.
Yeah, I think meditation is part of it for me as well, not nearly as consistently or deeply or effectively. But that feeling that you said, awe, that comes from being in nature, the silence that is the good kind of silence, right? Not the empty Performing Arts Center silence, but the empty Nevada desert silence. So for me, I've really found that being in nature is a reminder that I'm a small human animal on planet Earth. And that's really important for me to reconnect with that, that whatever the waves at the top are doing, that's not really who I am. And that whatever is wigging me out in any moment is very temporary in the scheme of things. And I find that being in nature really reconnects me with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say the same for me. I used to do quite a lot of Tai Chi. And through that, I took whole courses on breathing. I would stand in stork-like positions, for, I don't know, 45 minutes without doing anything but blinking. I did all sorts of things. And it was actually incredibly informative to my conducting, because there's a way in which what I wish for when I conduct is to be a conduit for music and for the energy that flows through that music and through the musicians and through the room to the listeners. So I actually do Qigong backstage often. It depends on how nervous I am. Sometimes I do it in my room before I go out, and sometimes I do it literally like moments before I go on stage, where I'm just moving my hands, but what I'm doing is opening my feet and grounding myself, and really trying to feel as though I'm a shell and a vessel for all that is about to come. And that, I think what that really is a way of calling myself to be present when I walk out on stage, and to really be in that experience with the people in front of me and behind me. And because it's quite possible to be worried about all kinds of things when you're going to walk out on stage and make something happen. But, just as Stephen, as you were describing, you're up at that beautiful mountain home and everything looks great. And you have this beautiful lake and all this beautiful stuff around you, but you're inside your head. There is one thing that is absolutely certain: when I am about to make music, I have to get out of my head. And I have to be in that moment and become part of something larger than myself. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And I can criticize myself all day long. There's always something to, believe me, I'm good at finding my own inadequacies. So I have to, join something and become in awe of what the human spirit can create as a collective. So I would say that practice is probably at this point the closest I come to meditation. Though I will say, I am always thinking that I want to get back to a regular practice of Tai Chi, and not just when I'm backstage. I know that it would be very, very, very wonderful for my spirit. So this is inspiring to me. Thank you, Stephen.
Brandi, I'll give you an opportunity as well. You were mentioning the value of family to you and how that became disrupted early on. I'd like to think that that's more or less back to normal.
Back to normal.
Good.
Yeah. Actually, my mom gave all of my family COVID, so that was fun. But everyone did fine, and they did fine. But that was that was back in September. And that's really the moment where I just said, whatever, I'm done. I'm done trying to control everything. So that really actually was probably the best thing that could have happened. Luckily, it ended well. I didn't get it. And then I wore my N95 mask in my house and at work all the time. So that was another little, get away, let me put my mask on before you come hug me. You know, that was a whole nother thing in my home. But it was also by then kind of comical. I built a greenhouse in late 2020, and that's where I go now. It's big enough I can walk in it and just sit in it and put my hands in the dirt and say hi to my little plants. And that's probably as close to meditation as I get right now. And singing in my car. I think those, like on the way home from work, I just try to outlet as much as possible. But yeah, it is truly inspiring. And I think that I can spare 15 minutes a night to get that back in my life.
Well, I think this is a nice, hopeful note on which to end. We will take questions from all of you, but first I would like to thank Denise, Stephen, Brandi, and Laura. Thank you, all of you, for providing such a wonderful and, despite the somewhat dark subject matter, hopeful and positive-minded and forward-looking discussion. Thank you all very much. Since we have a minute or two, do any of you have any questions you would like to ask? If you do, I'm going to run over and stick a microphone in your face so that everybody can hear it. Anybody? That can actually go also for people who are watching online. If you have questions. Catherine.
Not a question, but a comment. This seems like something rather brand new, but it has been for centuries a practice your early Christian and other denominations, other religions, have always gone out to the desert or whatever. So I'm glad to see this getting a little wider impact.
Especially given since we have such wonderful surroundings, drive a few minutes out of town.
Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. Any other questions or comments? Pardon me, everybody. Rosalind?
Yes, this isn't actually on the topic of stillness, but I'm just interested to ask Laura and Denise if you think we will go back completely to the way we've done music and performances in the past. It feels like now that the masks are coming off, people are returning to a way of doing things just as they have always done them without any change. It's almost as if we're back again and nothing has happened in between. And I'm just interested to know if you think we will still do slightly different ways of performing. There might be pop-up concerts still, or are we going to go back to just to the regular kind of schedules? I'm just interested to hear what you think might happen in that respect.
Yeah, and Laura, I'm going to jump in first. The things that I hope we carry forward are the collaboration. So arts organizations working together in new and different ways. Non-traditional performance spaces, right? There's this concept of site-specific dance, which is so cool and so rare, but it's also just dance, not on a stage. So the hope that we can do more, we as just a species can do more of those kinds of things, of collaborating, of taking down barriers to access, which I think is something that we've had a lot of time to think about too, that not everyone will purchase a ticket to come to a space to sit quietly for 2 hours. So how do we bring more to them? So it's not quite an answer, but it's what I hope we carry forward from this. As far as like, will we go back to the frantic pace? Yeah, humans don't learn that well. So yeah, I think we'll go right back to that.
Yeah, you know, from my perspective, when I look at what the Reno Phil is doing now, I don't think we will ever be exactly the same, because I think that the ways in which we have augmented are what we offer to the community. I think those have enhanced what we do. When I think about, the cameras, what we're currently doing is we're streaming our concerts. So for those people, you talk about that point of access, for the people that would really, they might have young kids, or they might, be tired, or the weather might be bad, or whatever, they can actually do an online ticket for $25 rather than coming to the hall. And that's something new and allows us to be, more flexible and offer our concerts in a different way. It's been really neat to create programs for kids that, when we haven't been able to bus kids into the hall until very, very recently. And we created some online materials for kids that were just incredibly impactful and wonderful, and allowed us to reach kids further out that would never be able to have the money in their school system to, come to an in-person YPC. And then also, just in talking about cameras and things, even if we were to decide not to continue streaming our concerts, we're beginning to experiment with iMag. So the other alternative to, streaming your concerts outside for other people to watch is to actually have screens in the hall that enhance the program for people that are sitting in the hall, so that they can see close-ups, over here of a musician while they're playing a solo, or they can see the pianist's hands when we have a piano soloist or something like that. So we did some of that on the youth concert that we just did at the Pioneer just 2 weeks ago, and it was just absolutely thrilling. So those are just two small ways. I would say that one thing that has come out of this whole experience is an incredible flexibility. The staff, it barely gets our pulse up anymore when we have to change on a dime and do X and Y and just shift gears and do. And I think that that's wonderful, because as the world changes and the community changes, it's one thing, we will always plan 2-3 years out. But I think the ability to adapt and to come up with a program now that fits this moment, I think that we will be better able to do that, and we'll be able to offer more and better things for our community.
All of the innovating that was forced upon organizations over the last couple of years is going to continue, because some good ideas have been generated as a result. Any other questions? Yes.
Not a question, but a comment. I was thinking how when we started this conversation today, we started in the early days when everyone was isolated, and it seems like that isolation, we were able to germinate these amazing creative ideas on how to actually expand the world in ways that touch everyone, even though we were isolated. And it was almost like it was this fertile ground where we were forced to look inside and create new ways of interacting. And I just think it's amazing. I know I'm not pretending to speak for the museum, but I'm really involved at the museum and a couple of programs. And I know all of the virtual programs that we all came up with are like, how can we do this? They're still continuing in addition to, in conjunction with the in-person activities. And so and all these virtual programs that people can sign up for, buy a ticket to, they're sharing them with your families. So you get not just one person hearing a concert, your kids, everybody in the household where that's showing is enjoying and experiencing it. So it just seems like a real glimmer of hope in a dark time, which is fertile ground. Or maybe it was that deep below the surface that Stephen talked about. Anyway.
Thank you. I think we'll take one more question. We're running a little late on our allotted time, but we're not going to worry about that.
Hi, I'm just curious for the composer, where was he physically located when he was writing the piece, and over what time period did he, when did he start and when did he finish the piece?
So Jimmy lives in Berkeley, California. So he was at his apartment there, and he wrote the piece. I mean, he had already sketched it out when we spoke. I mean, he had sketched out sort of the outline when we spoke in, it must have been March or April of 2020. And then, so because it was quite early on, it was probably April, May. And that's when he kind of shifted gears and changed it. And after that, he wrote it over the next 7 months. And it was really what was unusual. I mean, I guess for Jimmy, he really focuses on one thing at a time, pretty much. He makes sure that he doesn't take on too many things, that he is multitasking while he's actually creating music. So that's maybe not so atypical for him to just be writing this piece. But it was wonderful. We really did have his attention because everything else had kind of fallen away. And he had this one project. And what was so beautiful about it was he kind of changed the whole system he works with. He not only, wrote the piece differently, but he actually found a different kind of musical language as the underpinning. And it's much more direct and simple in a certain way, in a beautiful, masterful way. So yeah, it's very exciting.
So once again, I would like to thank Laura, Brandi, Stephen, Denise. Also thank Heather and everybody at the Reno Phil and everyone at Ollie for making this all possible. I hope you're all excited about hearing this new piece, which is just a few weeks away. So buy your ticket now. And we will see you again, if not just at the concert, in just about another month. We will continue this series with our third panel discussion, where we'll be talking about the third and fourth movements of Jimmy's symphony. But for now, good night, and thank you again for coming. We really appreciate it.